Well, hello everyone. This is our fourth class, and we have Daniel Ramirez Corzo as our guest. So we did his introduction last week, but he's a CONURB principal researcher. He's worked in the public sector, both at the national and local government level, and he has a lot of experience in this topic. So Daniel, thank you very much for joining us, and please, you can start your presentation whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. It's very nice to be here, even when it's Saturday, 9 a.m. So we'll discuss today. Samantha and Jose Carlos asked me to speak about Desborde Popular or popular overflow, and trying to relate that topic, that very important topic in the Peruvian social sciences, to informality processes and the contemporary socio-political processes in Peru. So you will see that when I speak about popular overflow, most of you will notice that I'm actually referring to things that happened way before you, most of you at least, were born. All of you, I think. So, but still, I'm going to speak about popular overflow as a very vibrant and recent event, and actually as a surprising and shocking event. And this has to do with the fact, or with the manner in which Peruvian society was before this process, and how it actually shook the basic structures of our society, and especially the structural conditions of the dominance and the power structures in our society. So, okay, first of all, I guess most of you actually haven't had the opportunity to read Jose Matos Mar main work, which is called Desborde Popular y Crisis del Estado, Popular Overflow and State Crisis, which was originally published in 1984, so 40 years ago almost. And this book, this is a very small book. This one is half of it is the original book. It's a relatively small book, but it was extremely influential in Peruvian social sciences and in Peruvian public debate also. Everybody, almost as much as Lima lo Horrible was a few decades before. So it actually had a very important role in how we understood and how we designed our policies and how the state related to these new people, these new populations they actually try to work with. So I'm going to present a very simple thing I prepared. Okay. My thesis, just to make it explicit, is that actually this process, the popular overflow or Desborde Popular, actually is a second foundation of Lima. I'm going to speak only about Lima because popular overflow speaks about Lima specifically. It refers to Peru as a whole, but it's mainly about Lima, and also because most of my experience and my research work has been in Lima, so maybe Jose Carlos is going to have different opinions about this because obviously from the Andes, people tend to think and see these processes in a different way. But well, most of the work of Matos Mar has been in Lima, and my own work, I mean, also has been in Lima. So I'm going to speak from here, and it's very important to say this because my ideas had been informed by my experiences in Lima, and I do not pretend to actually be able to understand or interpret or speak about the Peru as a whole, which is extremely complex and diverse, obviously. So let's start with the beginning. So what are we talking about when we speak about the popular overflow? As you all know, we had this from the 40s till the 80s, kind of. We had this huge migration process, as in many other different countries and cities, similar things happened. But in Peru, we had, during this period, 40s to 80s, a huge migration process from the Andes to the coast and from the rural to the urban. So this process, which was, the difference in Peru is that these migration processes were not triggered by industrialization. So it was not the case that we had our industry and our industry required workers. So people actually migrated to cover those places, those working places. Rather, in our case, what happened is that the Andean hacienda system was broke from the 30s, actually from the 20s in some parts, but actually in the 40s and 50s, it was in crisis because of the change in the international markets and the routes in which the roads in which the products used to travel from some of these haciendas and the Andes production centers to the coast and the ports. So we had this hacienda system actually in crisis. And from the 40s onwards, 30s onwards, actually, there was in Peru, all over Peru, but also in the rural areas, a relatively improvement in, what's that sound? Okay, we had a relative improvement in public health. So population increased significantly because of the decrease in the mortality rate. So this created an economic crisis, which actually expelled population from the rural areas in the Andes. There were more people than it was possible to support there. And also you had these new communication methods, the radio and the roads, which actually helped create the context for people to know there were other places with other opportunities. Also, but not in Peru, this is not the most significant thing, but also the urban areas were kind of attractive because of this. There was a promise of modernization during in the middle of the 20th century. We had new infrastructure. We had these messages getting everywhere through the radio and after that the TV, but mainly the radio, about how in Lima there were new industries, new jobs, new hospitals. So actual people living in the rural areas wanted to take part in that progress, in that modernization process, which is related to the industrialization through substitutions of imports. So industrialization through substitution of imports. I guess that's how you translate easy. Which was a model all over Latin America in that period, and in Peru it was very significant, and it actually is the base for the kind of the very small, the very embryonic welfare state we had between the 50s and the 70s was actually built over this modernization process and this industrialization process and the resources it generated. Obviously, this embryonic welfare state was completely destroyed in the 80s and moreover in the 90s. And the characteristic of the defining point of the popular overflow has to do with how these migration processes, these massive migration processes, were actually built over the migrants' cultural capital. which they took with them from the rural areas to the urban areas and from the Andes mainly to the coast. And they used this cultural capital, which was rooted in their traditional culture, in their traditions or ancestral, if you want, ways of living, and help them to actually insert themselves in economic circuits, in urban space, and actually to gain social reproduction, to obtain social reproduction. Those the cultural capital may be the main things, or what we can speak about, the main tools this cultural capital gave them, has to do with these extended family networks, both by blood and ritual family networks. Ritual family networks are those derived from godfathers. I don't know how you say padrinos, padrinajos, paisanaje, compadrazgo. And these kind of institutions, which are extremely important all over Peru, but especially in the Andes. You have these reciprocity ties and these obligations which derive from getting help from other people, and you actually are, and it's mandatory that you actually help them also. So there's a reciprocity obligation. This paisanaje link, which has to do with the fact we are seeing it today very clearly with our president, in which people actually has way more confidence and trust mostly people from their own, try to help people from their own land, from their own hometown or homeland. And also the experience most of these rural migrants had in peasant communities. Many of these migrants actually took part in the communities assemblies, they took part in the, or even organized, many of them actually had these experiences, actually taking part or organizing the communal works in their places of origins. So it was relatively easy to import those institutions, those practices to cities like Lima, and actually use them naturally to get a foot in Lima or in any other cities. So this huge migration process and the incorporation in Lima space, in the urban space of these populations and these practices, and also of this culture, we have to remember that until that point, Peru in general, and Lima also especially, was an extremely, the word is, you couldn't say, segregate is not the right word, but it was a very
elitist,
stamentary society, let's say. Yeah, it was not a classist society, it was a stamentary society. So there were very few instances in which indigenous people and non-indigenous people could actually meet. Of course, this has always been not so white and black and white, but it was way more stamentary than today. So these people getting to Lima, this huge amount of population getting to Lima and actually living in Lima and having families in Lima and bringing culture, relatively different culture, and non-hegemonic culture from the rural areas and the Andes to Lima, actually shook the social structures in the city very much. In urban terms, well, we all know these statistics that say that Lima, from the 40s till the 90s, actually multiplied its population by at least 10. So we went from having, actually, it's like 12 times. So we went from having 500,000 in the 40s to almost 9 million in 2004, which is what's shown here, and actually almost 10 million today, well, in the last census. just a little note, when I speak about Lima, I'm speaking about the metropolitan Lima area, which includes at least the province of Callao and the province of Lima, at least. So every mention to Lima is actually referring to the metropolitan area. However, let's speak, this is the spatial form, and these are the main demographic data. The full charts are after this. So in the left, the chart in the left actually shows the percentage of people living in Lima, which was migrant. So who were born outside of Lima. We don't have the disaggregated information about where they were born, but as you see, in 1961, almost half of people living in Lima were migrants. It doesn't matter when they migrated, but they were migrants. And in the chart on the right, you can see actually the growth, the population growth rates yearly. And between census, it's yearly, but it's the growth rate in the intercensal period. So the green one is Peru, red one is Callao, and blue one is Lima, the province of Lima. And as you can see, the province of Lima for the 61-72 period is almost 6%. This is a growth rate which is extremely high. It's not normal at all. It's really explosive. So the situation was going to be absolutely unmanageable. And actually, during this period, when you see the urban plans and these kind of things, they imagined this kind of growth rates were going to sustain during time over a longer period. So actually, they imagined a 15 million people of Lima with 15 million people living in them, which was extremely big. And actually, as we know now, it never materialized. But yeah, in the 40s, 70s, and 70s, we had quite a big migrant population living in Lima, close to half of the whole population, which is relatively normal for Latin American capitals and metropolises. And we had a huge population growth rate. However, when Matos Mar speaks about popular overflow, this text is not from the popular overflow, but from other document he wrote, which is called Las Migraciones Campesinas y el Proceso de Urbanización en el Perú, from the 1990s. He actually understood this process, this popular overflow process, not as a demographic one or a social one, obviously not even a spatial one, an urban one. He understood it as a political process. And this is the main thing he emphasizes. He speaks that what happened during these popular overflow processes is that actually the state structures were not capable to absorb and manage all these influx of migrants, and the state couldn't provide the services, housing among them, to these populations. So this population had to use this cultural capital they had to actually make a place for themselves in the city, a place in terms of housing, of urbanization, of economic activity, of social care, access to social care, and all this. So the main idea of this popular overflow is that what is here written on the right is in this parallel order, popular, vigorous, and inédit, it has placed the foundations for a modernization process of society from the bottom up. That's the main idea. The idea is that this incapacity of the state to actually respond to the demands of the people gave space to the emergence through the energy of the popular sectors of the new modernity we have here in Peru. And this is the most important idea, I think, in the Desborde Popular. However, in urban terms, in spatial terms, what does this mean? I'm using here some graphics we made for an article about almost 20 years ago now, and it's still very important and very relevant with Jose Barrera. We made a few poemas. I don't know how people poemas in English, maybe the same, poems. So what happened during this period? You may have heard that actually the migrations in Peru and this Andean migration in Peru is a thing from the 70s. Yeah, that's completely false. It's not from the 70s. It actually ended in the 80s, but the migration process started in the 30s, and actually during the 40s and 50s were the main decades of migration to Lima. What happened is that those people who migrated in the 40s and 50s had kids, and those kids were grown during the 70s. So during the 70s, it was more evident that we had a very important migrant population in Lima, and people from Andean ascent. Okay, so from the 40s, starting, Matos Mar says that from the 20s, but actually I think it's more convenient to speak about the 40s. We had the main barriadas. Barriada is the barriada is the spatial expression of the popular overflow. You all know what a barriada is, I guess. Barriada should be defined as a way of urbanization in which people initially occupy a piece of land, a vacant piece of land, being public or private, whatever, but without any facilities or amenities. People occupy that land, and when living in that land, they start a very long process of urbanization and self-building of the houses. So people actually, while in the place, they actually start using all these cultural resources, all this cultural capital we were speaking before, to get help to build their own houses. So with their neighbors, with their family, they made activities to get funds to actually work together one weekend in my house, 1 weekend in my neighbor house, or whatever. So they use this kind of AINI and Minca systems. And also they do something similar. They did something similar for the neighborhood level, because the state was not capable to do the urbanization process it should, according to the law given in the 61. So people actually took on their own hands through social organization to pull or to push the urbanization process, which implied to actually build roads, open roads, build facilities, do communal work to actually build the schools, or trying to get the water service to the neighborhood or whatever. So in this urbanization process, the key thing is that urbanization process is not a state of from barriada, it's not a state of the urbanization process, but it is a modality of urbanization process. It's the modality of urbanization process generated and logically derived from the popular overflow. So from the 40s, after the earthquake in Lima in 1940, we had the first barriadas. These barriadas were actually made by people already living in Lima, some migrants, but they had the characteristic of being very small barriadas, very small neighborhoods. And most of these neighborhoods were actually located very near to the conventional city, to the traditional city. The main example of this is Leticia, which is actually from the 30s, but well, let's say in the 40s. Leticia in Rimac, San Cosme, which is in La Victoria, and many of the barriadas, of the neighborhoods, which are in the left margin of the Rimac River in Cercado, El Planeta, Primero de Mayo, Virgen del Carmen, these neighborhoods. So these neighborhoods actually, if you see them now, even today in the satellite images, you can see that the plots are very small. They have very small plots. They have huge densities, and they don't have a very clear road network or public spaces. These neighborhoods were more like slums. These neighborhoods actually look like slums. Slums in the way how we say slum in Spanish, tugurios, are kind of tugurios now. And as I said, those are very small neighborhoods with relatively few families taking part in them. But from the 70s, actually, not in the 70s, in the 50s, the mid 50s, a new period in the barriada history started. This is the golden age of the barriada, the classical period of the barriada. And in this period, what happened is that actually the new barriadas were not built in land adjacent to the traditional city, but land which was not directly connected, distant lands. The main example and one of the starting points of this, the more evident starting point of this period, is actually the land occupation in Ciudad de Dios in San Juan de Miraflores in 54. Ciudad de Dios, as you can see here in the, I don't know if you can see my pointer. Well, Ciudad de Dios was actually quite far from the city at that moment. You had to go through a large stretch of desert to get there. It was very difficult to get water, to get public transport, to do anything there. But still, Ciudad de Dios, and you can imagine after Ciudad de Dios, Villa El Salvador, which is even further away, but on the other way of the north, the same thing happened in Comas, in Coyique, even in Independencia, which were occupations which were not directly connected to the urban fabric at the moment. People, even when it was far away and it was not connected, and it was very hard at that moment to actually get the services there, people decided to go and start building their cities, their neighborhoods. The main difference is that, for example, when you speak about, or when you think about market to buy food or whatever, in the first period of barriadas, even when you were in a place with nothing, the adjacent neighborhood, which was a traditional neighborhood, did have a market, and they did have water supply, and they did have facilities and public infrastructure and public services. But when you go all the way to Ciudad de Dios, to these distant and not adjacent places to actually start a new city, you don't have anything. So you have to actually build your own market. You have to actually fight for the public services to get there, which are which was very difficult. There were a few elements which made that possible. On the first place, social movements were quite strong in this moment, from the 50s till the 80s. The urban popular movement was extremely strong. You had the workers' unions helping to do some of these barriadas, and you had the associations of migrants from same places, clubes departamentales or clubes provinciales, actually being the base and the foundation for these organizations, which actually took part in these land occupations. So you had a social and political tissue actually supporting this kind of huge efforts, much wider efforts than before, to actually build not only houses, but neighborhoods and actually even cities. This golden period of the barriada is the period in which most of the imaginary about the barriada and the popular overflow was built on. And actually, Desbordes Populares y Crisis del Estado takes directly from that moment. So obviously, Matos Mar thought about the popular overflow as a very romantic and in a very positive way, in a manner in which people which had been historically excluded and which were subject to almost feudal conditions of life actually come to Lima and got their own by themselves, actually built their own cities and conquered Lima. Let's say conquered the city, made their own space for them in the city. So it had a huge impact culturally. And from this period, well, actually these images, which are from, I'm going to show several images, are from the early 90s, but from between 90 and 94 are from TAFOS, the social photography workshop, which our university holds the archive. It's a very important and extremely interesting project which happened during that period. And I have an article about this from the visual anthropology perspective, but it's an extremely important and extremely interesting archive. So if you have time and interest, please visit it. I'm thinking about actually doing an exhibition at some point about this. So I made an article about the memory of the city and how these images could help or could be part of the process of memory building for the city, and how this memory has to do or should have to do with the migration processes and the popular overflow and all this. So as you see, in this collection of photographies, you can see very well the motifs and the images that the popular overflow represents. The idea of land occupation, self-building, care, reproduction, getting something for your kids, the idea of migrations, the relation between the new life you're building here, but using the cultural capital, which was given to you by your Andean roots or your Andean background, the 3 generations in front of the bus. You have the cortapelo ceremony. I really don't know how to, the ceremony, the ritual actually, to cut the hair of the newborn, relatively newborn, which is another opportunity to actually create these compadrazgo relations. This is actually in El Salvador, I think. This idea of informality, of economic informality, of people from extremely disadvantaged conditions and coming from structural exclusion to actually building for themselves an economic sustain, even when it includes or implies actually clashing with the public or formal structure. This photograph is actually in a vaso de leche committee, and they were doing this. They were waiting the kids to see if they were anemic or whatever. But you have this idea of the community relations, the capacity of through organizations, through social organization and popular organization to actually improve their conditions of life. The idea of the nation which was being built, obviously through schools and with all the education, the myth of education. If you're interested in those issues, please see Carlos Iván de Gregori's book about Mito de la Educación. Again, this idea of the faena, the collective work to actually improve the neighborhood. In this case, it's in El Agustino. They were actually building a football court, a very small football court. And again, these images about people actually achieving the improvement of their services collectively is the motive behind many of these images and many of the imaginaries around popular overflow. This one is in Villa El Salvador, in the football championship between the blocks of the neighborhood. Actually, very close to what was my office. Okay, but even when those images are from the 90s, they relate to this classical barriada period, the golden age of the barriada. As Greece had its classical period, the barriadas had its classical period, which was between the 50s and some point in the 80s. But after that, there's a third period in the barriada process, which is very similar to the first one. It's extremely similar, in which, again, barriadas, neighborhoods were, again, very small. Those new neighborhoods weren't far away in unconnected lands, but in adjacent ones. And the people who took part in these land occupations and in these new barriadas were not people actually coming from other places of Peru. They were not migrants, but sons and daughters of those who migrated in the decades before. So you actually kind of repeat what happened in the first period in this third one. And it has to do again with the fact that the conditions which actually made possible for this huge urban expansion and this huge collective movement to actually build the city were not present anymore. And those conditions had to do with the social organization, the social tissue, which actually permitted this aggregation of interests and of resources necessary to create these huge land occupations and these huge barriadas. The fact that because of the intern armed conflict and the Fujimori period, we had a break in the history, in the transmission of history and of knowledge between these social organizations in the neighborhood. So all those who were leaders in those neighborhoods were not able to actually teach or transfer their knowledge to the following generations. And also because economically and politically, the situation changed totally. The state from the 80s onwards actually left completely the role of actually providing services and, well, almost completely services and opportunities to the people, and left it in the market, left it to the market in the new market, open market conditions that we had at that moment. And economically, because of the changes we had from the 90s, actually people started or got into a more precarious way of living, which made more difficult to take part in these collective organization processes. However, this is the second part of the charts I showed before. As you can see, not only the spatial aspect changed. If you see the demographic indicators, the demographics. Oh, I didn't use the last one. Sorry. Well, as you can see, the annual growth rate of Lima has actually been declining. I made a mistake, and the one in the left, I guess it's your left also, doesn't show the complete lines, but for the 2007-2017 period, the growth rate of Peru is 1.3, and the growth rate of Lima is 1.2, Lima and Callao. Which means that actually now Lima is growing less than the Peru as a whole. That's extremely important because this shows that, at least demographically speaking, the popular overflow process has actually ended. At this moment, Lima doesn't grow at the rate it used to have. And if we see at the right, the blue bars still show the percentage of migrants, of lifelong migrants in Lima, and the green line show how many of those migrated to Lima in the last 5 years. This is information from the census, from several census that I actually compiled this information for the 2014 Metropolitan Plan of Lima, and I updated the data yesterday with the last census. So right now, we have something like 6% of the population of Lima migrated in the last 5 years. The data about this recent migration, we only had it since the 1991. As you can see, from 81 to 93, it was an increase. There was an increase in this recent migration, which had to do with the people being forcibly displaced because of the war in Peru, in the internal conflict. But after that, it actually goes down because people who migrated 50, 40, 60 years ago are now dying because they are very old. And the people who actually needs or decides to migrate to Lima permanently is less and less and less every time. Well, it's not less, it's proportionally less. If you see the absolute data, it increases, but this is in percentage from the total. So it's less relevant. So today, Lima definitely is a city of migrants. It will always be a city of migrants because all metropolises are city of migrants. Lima and New York and Beijing and Rio de Janeiro and Mexico, all the metropolises are cities with very important migrant populations. The thing is that this process is not explosive anymore. It's starting to get not under control because no one is controlling it, but it's starting to be something we can live with, which doesn't transform the Lima, doesn't transform the city every time. It already transformed it. And how these people here, I'm actually start to go into the things that are in the article I think you read. How this third moment in the history, how does it really is? How does it shown in the city? This is the three main districts in the southern part of Lima, in the southern cone of Lima. And as you can see, these new settlements, this is a very old map, it's from 2005. So it shows the neighborhoods, the barriadas created from the 1990 till 2005. And as you can see, the areas that were occupied during that period are really marginal areas. And the neighborhoods are extremely small neighborhoods. Here in this very small area, you have 11 and three more down here. So 15, 14 neighborhoods, different barriadas with different organizations, with different representatives, with different urbanization processes and spatial projects, let's say. And that's very, very frustrating. Well, the two cases you already saw had to do with how state related to these neighborhoods and to their urbanization processes. But before getting to that, or maybe we're going to speak about that in a moment, I would like to show, which I think is the most blatant example of what is happening now with the popular overflow. Well, now, but this is also from the beginning of the 2000s, so it's quite old. And this is the Lomo de Corvina occupation. Lomo de Corvina, that's where I made my undergrad thesis. Lomo de Corvina was an area in Villa El Salvador, which was not occupied during the 70s, 80s, or 90s, because it was too risky to occupy, because it's a sand dune. So everybody knew in Villa El Salvador that it was not suitable for housing. Everybody knew. It was common knowledge at the moment. But still, in 2003, I think, or two, at the end of 2000, I don't remember if 2002 or 3, it was occupied, it was invaded by two different groups in two different ways. As you can see, the invasion, the left part of the invasion, was people that actually got there already organized in blocks and in neighborhoods. And they made like a fence around each block and got inside, and they had a list of people who were going to live in that block, and they had been paying over time to actually take part in the invasion. So it's a very classic example. No, well, it's not a classic example of land trafficking, because in that moment it was land trafficking through social organization. It was not a criminal activity. It was pre all this criminal economy of land trafficking. But as soon as they occupied the land, they were the first ones, the plots. Many other people from other areas, because the dune is a little higher, everybody in Villa El Salvador saw it, so everybody went to take part in the invasion. And here, people invaded however they could. They just took whatever they could. They bought some esteras, they placed them in the dune, and when they were there already, 1, 2, 3 days after that, they started to think, okay, maybe we should be blocks. We should start growing from these individual people. We should start growing our blocks and our barriadas, our social organization. So at the beginning, what you have in the right is the historical process of these neighborhoods. Each color is one different neighborhood. The one neighborhood, which means they have a different leadership, a different name, and they each try to convince the other neighborhoods to actually join them and be one bigger and stronger neighborhood. But what happened? Each color is one different neighborhood. As you can see, over the time, in this very short period in which I lived there, so it was only 3-4 months, this neighborhood actually, instead of aggregating and building bigger and stronger and more logical urbanization-wise urbanization-wise, more logical neighborhoods, they actually increased their fragmentation. So what happened is that at the end of the process, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 neighborhoods, 7 different neighborhoods, while at the beginning you only had 5. But what actually happened, and this is extremely weird, is that those neighborhoods were discontinuous. So you had an archipelago of neighborhoods. The urbanization process had actually nothing to do with space. It was a political project, not a spatial project. So it doesn't matter if you had one block here and the other block all over there, and in the middle you had this other neighborhood, because at the end they were not, it wasn't as relevant for them to actually think how we're going to build the road, how we're going to put the pipelines, or where we're going to put the park that we need here. And it was important to actually grow a stronger political force to actually negotiate with the municipality at that moment to get the neighborhood to be recognized and to start the land titling process, which was the only thing, well, not the only, but the main thing they were concerned with, to get a piece of paper for their showing that they were the owners of that piece of land. The problem here, or the main problem here, is that this ownership of the land, this land titling process, and this fetishism of the title of the piece of paper which constitutes the title, was completely disconnected from the urbanization process project. And during the golden period of the barriadas, land titles were not important. They existed and they were important, but were not the most important thing. The most important thing was clearly to actually build together the city, to open the roads, to build the sidewalks, to trying to get the school in the neighborhood, to find a way to actually get the park to be green, to, anyway, many different things. And the land title was the last one of those, was the least important one. In this last period, the thing is opposite. The thing now is completely different. People is way more interested in the property than in the quality of living or the quality of space. Finally, what's the problem with the popular overflow? Popular overflow has been the most relevant social, cultural, political, and spatial process of the 20th century, at least in Lima. Maybe all over Peru, but at least in Lima, this process, which is very well described by Matos Mar and almost all social sciences after him in Peru, is clearly the most important one. Now, what is the problem with that? The problem, I think, is that still today, and I have shown you how things changed radically from the 90s, people maintain this kind of discourses that I'm showing you right now in the screen, which are not mine, obviously. These are from one colleague, which I'm very fond of him, but I think it's relatively old. Maybe he was very mistaken. And they tend to emphasize this idea of the Lima of the migrants, the Lima in which we all have migrant parents, in which the North Cone and the South Cone, and we are all doing businesses and growing economically. And they still speak about the popular overflow as a thing which is still happening, which is not. But which is, I think, worst, is that they tend to believe that the new expressions of the popular overflow, which is specifically the consumption, the new forms of consumption, the new things like the technocumbia, things like the well, starting in the 70s, the wino and this cultural consumption in these areas of the city, these popular areas of the city, actually are a way to start building citizenship, a full citizenship, which implies social rights and political rights and political participation, so empowerment of the people who were excluded traditionally. I think there is more optimism than realism in this view. I think that while I believe that social scientists and anthropologists especially, I'm an anthropologist, social anthropologist by formation, tend to we still think about the popular overflow as the process in which all good things generated. And some very good things actually came from that. The democratization of society is evident. We are not a feudal society any longer. Of course, it's not only this migration process which is relevant to that. It also has to do with more economical and political processes like the land reform and especially the land reform, which actually demolished the feudal state and the feudal economic relations in Peru, mostly. But still, land reform and popular overflow are related in some way. But still, as I was saying, I think that we have a much more optimistic view, and we have a difficulty to recognize how reality has changed, how this popular overflow is an already consolidated phenomena. And now we are in a different moment, in a moment which is built over that refundation process of Lima. I think that's the problem. Many people tend to think, apparently, that processes actually go from one moment to the next one, and then you start a new one and from a blank sheet, let's say. And that's not how it works. This new moment is actually based on the reality left behind by the one before. So obviously, our moment now and the problems we have now are directly derived from the overflow process, but not because of how the overflow process was, but because of how we are after the overflow process. It's a very different thing, because we have to understand that the overflow, popular overflow, is not something what happened to us. The popular overflow is something which defined what we are today as a city and as a society. That's extremely important to understand, because it is now from this new reality, well, not new, it has 40 years. It's relatively old now, at least 30 years. It is from this new reality that we have to research and decide how we are going to be and how we're going to make our institutions work. And that's how I intended to relate this to informality and urbanism. So that's it.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. We went a little over the time that you wanted, but I think it was worth. It was a very complete picture of the whole phenomenon. So I think we have a little less than half an hour to some questions or comments. So I will just maybe first open it to the students to make any question, any comment, or something that you would like to know more about what Daniel has spoken to us. At least I see first we've been speaking about informality maybe in general terms. Now we have a periodization of this in these different decades of, especially during the 20th century or even until today. And we have also the concept of popular overflow as a category of analysis of this phenomena. So also interesting to speak about, but yeah, let's open it first to questions or comments of anybody. Yeah, we will begin with Diego and then we go on. So Diego, please.
Hi everyone. Hi Daniel, thanks for the presentation. Sorry about the camera, I have some connection problems. Okay, my question is more linked to a curiosity in an image that you showed. It was a photo of the migration of the 70s, it seems to me, when neighbors are in the middle and behind you can see a sign that says Planos de Asesoramiento y Construcción. It generated uncertainty in me because I would like to know if this is an early attempt by the state or some private professional team to advise with the construction of the houses of these neighbors, or it's just about scammers. And what strikes me is if this had an impact in some cases or was rejected by the neighbors in general. Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Diego. I don't know if there's any other questions, or maybe we can take a couple before giving it to Daniel. Any other comment or question? If not, then we can go to okay, then Joaquin. So let's take Joaquin's more and then we go to Daniel. Please, Joaquin.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel, for your presentation. I have a question regarding that you mentioned at some point that this phenomenon of overflow has stopped and is not actually, like, right now is not happening anymore. So I wanted to know how this works, because I think that if, like, although it's true that we are not seeing a lot of like migrants coming to Lima in the sense of that we are not seeing more like migration itself, but we keep seeing that our population keeps growing and keeps growing like outside the formal city. So I think that it seems like we can talk about overflowing, not just from people coming to a city, but the city growing itself because of older generations.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to know, how can you explain this, like, this dynamic?
That's extremely interesting. Maybe first, I'm sorry because my English is extremely poor now because I haven't been using it for quite a long time. So please excuse my English. Secondly, this is the photograph someone asked about. This is from the 90s. This is actually 92, I think. We didn't have cell phones until, well, those of us which were part of the higher classes in Peru, we had them maybe since 94 or 95. But in Peru, we still had these public telephones till, I don't know, 2005, 2010, maybe. But yeah, this photograph is from 92, I think 92 or 93. And actually this thing behind, which is Asesoramiento, Construcción en Planos, is a completely private enterprise. I'm not completely sure because I don't know this case specifically, but I'm quite sure it's a private enterprise. All over the barriadas, this is very interesting. Many times we tend to believe that people who are self-building their houses are doing it spontaneously. And actually, people, not very smart people, speak about spontaneous cities or spontaneous neighborhood. That's so stupid that actually makes me very bad. How is it possible that someone believes that actually build a part of the city is something spontaneous? You have to think about it, you have to prepare it, you have to buy the materials, you have to organize people to actually take a piece of land. It's not spontaneous. only because it has not been planned and approved by the way how the norms and the laws say it has to be approved or thought, it doesn't mean it's spontaneous. It has been planned and prepared in a different way. And in the self-building world of the houses, they have this, it's very common to have this, they are not architects, they are many times topographers. I don't know if they are called that way, topographers. There are lots of topographers and people who actually worked with engineers or worked with architects who actually made these plans for the houses and actually helped people to build their houses. So yeah, they didn't have the proper certification, but they were kind of, they had some kind of technical assistance, not formal one, but they had. Now, speaking about the second thing, well, we have to think, there are two very important things to say about that. People who grew up in Lima is people from Lima, are not migrants. So they are Limanians, let's say. So all those who are descendants of migrants, sons or daughters of migrants, the second generation migrants or the third generation migrants are not migrants anymore. They are Limanians. We are all Limanians. So we don't have, Lima grows quite a lot. 1% of growth each year equals 100,000 people. So every year in Lima, we have 100,000 people more, which need housing, which need, who needs housing, who needs place in the city. So our vegetative growth is quite large, 100,000 people each year. It's immense. It's very, very big, but it has nothing to do with migration now. Well, not nothing. It has little to do with migration. It has to do with the fact that people have kids. We all, well, not all of us, but many people have kids. So Lima grows quite a lot, but it is not because of migration. It is because people have kids. It's what is called vegetative growth, which equals 100,000 people a year. That's the dimension of the growth. Okay, so are we still in the popular overflow or not? Matos Mar says in this book, which is from 2010, he says that we are, the title of the book is Perú, Estado desbordado y Sociedad Nacional Emergente. This book shows that some people books don't get better with time. And but the idea of Estado desbordado is quite important. So we are not in the period or the process of popular overflow, but we can understand, we can say that we are an overflown society. This condition of being overflown is part of what we are now. So we have normalized and institutionalized that the state is not going to be capable to include all people in the formality, in the world of the formality. And that's one way of seeing this, one way in which with which I don't agree, but that's one way of understanding. So we were in the popular overflow, then this process actually got stabilized itself, and we are now an overflown society. And the idea of this overflown society has to do with the idea that we have these formal frameworks, this rule of law, and we have this other thing which is not extraordinary, it's always going to be there, has been there for the last 5, 7, 8 decades, maybe, but it's always going to be there. So, okay, now we have the state and we have this other thing, this informality world. I don't agree with that because I don't believe formality and informal. Actually, I don't believe in the concept of informality itself. It's a horrible concept. It doesn't work to understand reality. The reality is that the state and the public policies actually include both of those worlds. The public policy in Peru has institutionalized and designed forms of action for what it calls formal and for what it calls informal. So it's not informal if the state recognizes it and design policies especially for those. And those are not policies only to try to make them go into the formal. On the contrary, for example, the land titling policy is clearly directed to actually, well, now we know that it has as the main or one of its main impacts to actually perpetuate that form of production of space and of plots and of property. So the state, the formal and informal are not separated and independent. They are completely connected, and both are categories, artificial categories, in which we as a society organize our public life.
Thank you, Daniel. I have a couple of questions, but I'm going to refrain from doing them. I don't know if someone else has any other comment or question or want to comment on what Daniel has just said. He, among other things, he has said that we should not use the category of informality, which is the title of this course. So that will be interesting to also discuss. But yeah, I don't know. Any other comment or question?
And actually, there's a lot of people speaking about against that category, and Anja Roy among them.
Right.
So
Wait, well, while someone else makes another comment or question, why don't you speak to that? Because that's something that we've been speaking in the last session. Or I don't know if you, Samantha, want to talk about this, because that's also the title of the course is not like defending the use of the term, but actually to bring that discussion to the table. So yeah, or Samantha, you wanna talk something about it?
Let's hear Daniel first.
no, but
Yeah.
well, I don't have, my background is not in North American academia, but I can say what Alain Gilbert said, and Jeffrey Payne, they spoke about this. Well, they actually have shown not only they show how the Hernando de Soto proposals, the Hernando de Soto theory about land titling was mostly wrong, and how it didn't have a significant impact in the quality of life of people, but they actually showed how this separate set of rules for the informal were actually perpetuating or legitimizing different treatments from the state to different kinds of people. And that is what I think is behind this. I think that when we say formal and informal from the state, what they are really trying to say is policies for white rich people and policies for brown poor people. And that's the reality. We have a state which thinks it's legitimate to have different treatments for different people because they think people are different because of some things that we still have from our feudal past. And I think that this idea, this category of formal and informal, is actually there to give legitimacy to those kind of policies. And that's why we have, well, it has for a very long time now, from the 70s, actually, 70, one, I think, when Gustavo Riofrío wrote Se busca terreno para la próxima barriada, he spoke about the urban policy of the two-phase urban policy, which we still have and which is very clearly there, even with the new law, because we made a whole law dedicated only to the formal sector, which says almost nothing to the informal sector. Informal, again. So the state has this two-phased policy, one for the formal, traditional, and one for the informal, since the 60s, at the beginning with good intentions, and now because it's relatively comfortable. And even when we know that informality is not only a thing of informality from the legal perspective, it's not something which is only done by poor people. We know that rich people and big businesses are extremely informal and even illegal, but still the category informal is applied mostly to legitimize this different set of rules and set of practices for some populations.
Samantha, you wanted to
Yes,
comment?
just maybe a short comment. I think that, Daniel, what you just mentioned actually is a perfect connection to what we were discussing last class. So we actually were discussing how this idea of informality and why we, in a way, keep talking about this is because it can be a very comfortable way for the higher classes to enact actions towards these populations without actually questioning the sort of status quo or the socioeconomic hierarchy in a way. So we actually discussed a little bit about that. So I just wanted to make a reference to what we were discussing in the last class, just for as a way of also reminding our students of some of the conversations we had last week, which were, I think, exactly to what you were saying, to some of the points Anania Roy and others make about this not exactly binary between formal and informal. So I think I'll leave it at that in the sake of time.
It's extremely interesting because actually in the concept, Matos Mar wrote in a context which was still directly linked to the dependency theory in Latin America. And in the dependency theory framework, context, we can say, nobody spoke about informality. Or if you want to say something about informality, you could say that informality is an expression of structural exclusion of populations from the model of accumulation of the capital, let's say, of the capital with K, the capital in the sense of the Marxian capital. This idea is extremely important because when Matos Mar speaks about this, the popular overflow, he doesn't speak about something which is being built on the side of state to actually stay on the side of state. He doesn't speak about something alternative that is going to stay alternative. He is speaking about the building of a new society, which is going to express itself in a new state. So Matos Mar is not praising informality. On the contrary, he's praising the energy of people, of excluded people, traditionally excluded people, to actually build a new state, which is coherent and related to their real needs and their real cultural background and how they are used to organize and work together. And that's the difference. So what happens now is that for many people, when we speak about popular overflow, is that it's something like if we have created a different order, which is always going to be in parallel with the formal order. And I think that's betraying Matos Mar ideas, which I actually think that Matos Mar itself betrayed his ideas with his book.
Which is also part of the event that CONURB is also organizing. But before that, one last chance for anybody to make any question or comment, because I think we are close to the time. So if there's anything left, take advantage of the time, because I think the last round of questions or comments. I'm gonna give you some seconds.
Nah, that's it. Then,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah, so let me then yeah, I have also some ideas around this, but probably that's going to be also part of the discussion on the event that CONURB is organizing, and then I'm going to let Samantha maybe introduce a bit of it, because we have touched upon this a little bit, the concept of desborde and the concept of post-desborde. And I think that's a category that we might want to, I don't know, think a little closer. Today, Daniel has made an approach to desborde or to overflow more in the demographic part of it, in the terms of how many migrants are coming to the city anymore, maybe not that much in the recent decades. But I would like to also leave as a question whether, even though maybe demographically that's not the process anymore, in the way of occupying the land that has grown from the informal occupations in the recent decades, there is still many of the logics of what you've shown in terms of social organizations. So that's one question that I wanted to leave there, whether if we think about overflow in relation to the social organizations, to the neighborhood organizations, to the neighborhood associations, whether that's a phenomenon that is still there, that has not disappeared, or maybe it has. I think once we've talked about this, but you said like the social organizations that there were in the past, they are not that there anymore. But I don't know. That's all. Like a
there is the perversion of those dynamics. That's the thing. I mean, popular overflow and this classical period of barriadas actually had a form of organization which doesn't exist anymore. The only thing that remains are some practices, but being perverted. So it's like saying the guerrilla movements from the 50s still exists. No, but we still have the Shining Path in the Vrime area. Okay, of course, kind of related, but they are completely different things. So that's how we now have a criminal world and a fragmented organizations and people who really need housing, and they are kind of related to what we had in the 70s and 60s, but they're not the same. And it's completely unfair for those from the 60s and 70s to actually say they are similar.
Right. Yeah. That's something I would like to.
No, we'll discuss it.
Yeah. So Samantha, I give it to you.
So can I leave now?
Yes, just a small note, and then you're free to leave. Thank you so much for being here. This is just, we mentioned this, I think, in our first class. So we mentioned Daniel is also a principal researcher at CONURB. And I think the conversation we started to have today is very much related to some of the conversations that will be taking place in the international seminar of Ciudades Post-Desborde. So this is just a small space to also remind all of our students of this seminar, which is around 3 topics. So I'll just show them very quickly on the screen. That's not the right post. About the state and if it's in crisis or not, and its relation to urban policy, governance and new relationships between state and society, the new phase of Peru and social transformations, migrations, and new urban actors. And this maybe is the most related to what Daniel was actually mentioning right now. If we've been moving from overflown space to a fragmented space and its relations to city, territory, and housing. So I think the conversations we will be having in that seminar are also very much related to some of the conversations we started to have today. So it will be very interesting for all of you to join. This will be at the end of October, so in a few months.
Yeah, the author, the mind behind this event is basically Daniel. So and that's why it's also related to this session. Okay, so thank you so much, Daniel.
And really, sorry, if you can actually read this book, it's incredibly good. It's amazingly good. And this is actually from the university. I took it a couple of days ago. Okay.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for your time and for your presentation. So yeah, and I think we will see each other maybe in that event.
Bye bye.
So,
thank you. So, okay, so moving very quickly to our own. Well, first, I don't know, José Carlos,